Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, where we talk about how writing works, how writers work, and what the best writers risk being strange. And today we're talking about maybe not the best writer, myself, but how I risk being strange, specifically what we are doing with stranger fiction. So I feel like, one, welcome back to the podcast. If you are a close, longtime follower of this podcast, you will have noticed that we just haven't had a podcast for a while. You'll also have noticed that there just hasn't been a solo podcast for a while where it's me talking. You know, I kind of got off doing the ones focused on me. I find them less interesting personally because I don't have a guest to talk to, but I know from the stats that the audience prefers them. So I am back to talk about what I'm doing and what the company is doing, what Stranger Fiction is doing. I feel like over the years, I started this company, Stranger Fiction, in 2020. It's now 2025. In that 5 years, I don't know that I have been necessarily the best about messaging. And I don't know that it's been particularly clear what I've been doing or what I've been trying to do. I feel like, Stranger Fiction to many of you is just a logo you see places or a phrase you hear me say sometimes. And I don't know that I've really, built the brand and, as it were, in a way that makes maybe as much sense to you as it does to me on the inside. I've been spending most of my time working at Stranger Fiction, working on Stranger Fiction, being sort of a driving force behind this company, Stranger Fiction, that I started and that others have been helping me with. I've got other people working at this company, Leonard Redchenko, who you may know from the podcast. Again, you may have heard me saying things like Lyndon's involved, working here at Stranger Fiction, but I don't know that people really understand what that means. Brian also has been doing a lot of work at Stranger Fiction. She's been on the podcast. We've talked to her here and there. But again, I don't know that people really understand who these people are, who I am, even sometimes, people I think listening to this podcast don't even really know that I'm a writer, other than the fact that I mention here and there, but they may not be familiar with my writing. They may just be here because they want writing instruction, or they just, maybe like my guest. All that stuff is great. I understand the audience, is a bit more fragmented than maybe I would like it to be, or that it has been in the past when, this was more really focused around me. But one thing I've been trying to do over the years is get it less focused around me. Not that, we aren't going to stay focused on what I'm doing and my values and what I'm interested in here, but I've been kind of trying to branch things out a little bit. So what I wanted to talk about today is just what Stranger Fiction is, what it is going towards, how I've been working on it. And you'll notice going forward that I'm really going to try to make Stranger Fiction and the authors, not just myself, but also myself, but the other authors, the other people involved, my own projects with the company, more of the focus. I, as a writer, as a creator, I'm mostly a writer, but I'm also a producer. I do a lot of work with other companies. I've got a new book coming out with another company, but I also am doing more work with Stranger Fiction, my company. And I want to just start the podcast anew, in a sense, by just sort of diving a little bit into who Stranger Fiction is, what it is, rather, and sort of why you should care, and maybe why you might want to get a bit involved and support Stranger Fiction a little bit. So this isn't a pledge drive, but I am just sort of be talking through sort of what are the options here in terms of what we're doing. I'm trying to really focus what the company is doing in a fuller sense than I have in the past. I've been doing a lot of experiments with the last 5 years. I've been trying a lot of things. Certain things have been working well, other things have not been working well. I feel like it's finally at the point where I'm starting to get some puzzle pieces falling into place. I'm starting to get some, of the infrastructure built out in the way that I was envisioning in the first place. Of course, when I started this company, I started it, like many people did, full of optimism in January 2020, thinking, well, this is going to be a banner year. And immediately by March 2020, we were in lockdown, and all of the plans, which many of which involved travel, were out the window. And, good and bad things happened. Business wise, many bad things happened, not business wise, but like if you just put the pandemic aside for a second, just forget about that pandemic for a minute. Professionally speaking, a lot of really positive things were going on in the world at that time for me. But the success of certain things almost presented their own problems because I started to get stretched very thin. When I started the publishing company, or the company, uh, I really had a vision that I think still is intact, but that I think I'm now in the position to really move forward on a little bit more fully and cleanly. So I want to talk a little bit about what that vision is, what Stranger Fiction is, what the vision for Stranger Fiction is, how it's going to matter to things like this podcast, how it might matter to you, what the kind of opportunities are there for you, maybe as a listener, maybe as a writer, if you are a writer, and so on. And just sort of what I think fundamentally I want to do. And if you are on YouTube, I'm going to be showing you a little slideshow. So I'm just going to share my screen here. You don't need to worry about that exactly. But please note that if you're on YouTube, you should be able to just see what I'm talking about on the screen a little bit. If you're not on YouTube, it doesn't matter. It's just a really simple slideshow. It's just mostly showing you words that I'm only showing you so that you understand how they're spelled. Of course, primarily this is about a podcast. So the thing I really want everybody to understand about Stranger Fiction is that I'm going to not move everything, but everything's going to kind of end up blowing to one place. So if you go to staystrange.ca, when you hear this, if you type into your browser staystrange.ca, it will take you to the Patreon site for Stranger Fiction. Now, at that Patreon site, you can just join for free, or like follow it, right? You're not exactly join, but you can follow the Patreon page for free. You don't have to necessarily spend money this way. And you don't even have to do it at all. But if you were to do that, everything sort of that I'm doing will flow to that. So what I mean by this is all the sort of different other places where I'm showing up in the world, I'm going to flow back to the Patreon. I'm going to kind of be more focused on the Patreon as a hub. And also my own website, strangerfiction.ca, as a hub. So whether you go to staystrange.ca or strangerfiction.ca, it doesn't matter so much. But do kind of get in the habit of going to one of those two places if you want to just sort of get all the information. Now, of course, if you don't want to be on those sites, if you don't want to be, then the best thing to do is to sign up to the newsletter. So if you go to strangeinc.ca, then you can sign up for my newsletter, which is called, of course, Strange Inc. And that newsletter is really the best way to keep in touch. But I'm not going to barrage you every minute with what's going on. So if you want to know kind of like what's going on, when it's going on, kind of keep, sign up for Patreon, get on the app. Even if you're just following it for no money, it'll just sort of ping you when there's a new thing out. If you were to kind of care about all the disparate things. But you'll get a summary of that, what's new in the newsletter if you sign up to strangeinc.ca. So if you're already signed up, don't worry about this stuff. But I'm going to kind of, point being, I'm just sort of going to make these places sort of more hubs. So the newsletter, the Patreon page, the website, either one of those, if you're following it, you'll get all the useful information. As opposed to, I think, how it's been happening in the past, where I've got sort of a thing over here, a thing over there, a thing over here, a thing over there. And you could very easily, just because of my own lack of organization, you could be very easily have been sort of following um, the Patreon and not know about this other thing going on. You could have easily been on the newsletter and not know this other thing was happening, um, because it was mentioned in a different spot. You could have been on this, subscribed to this podcast, but not necessarily knowing what was going on over here. That we're going to be in Toronto at the Toronto Comic Art Festival or something, right? So in the past, I've sort of had, I think, a bit too much fragmentation. And to me, it all makes sense because I'm in the back seeing it all. But of course, to you, probably it doesn't make sense. Very few of you are probably subscribed to this podcast, plus on the newsletter, plus maybe on the Patreon, plus, maybe you're, reading the trade journals and, know that my book's coming out, plus, checking the website, seeing, what's new there, right? Very few of you are going to do all those things. If you're listening to this podcast, probably you're just subscribed to this podcast, right? You might also be on the newsletter. You might also have supported me on Patreon. You might also have, a boost to the Kickstarter, but who knows? I don't know that necessarily because I don't know every single one of you. And even those of you that I do know, like, I don't know if Gregory's subscribed to this podcast. I don't know if Lyndon, who works for Strange Fiction, I don't know if he even gets the newsletter, right? Not everybody gets everything, and not everyone pays attention to everything, and they don't need to. I'm supposed to be paying more attention to it. So again, you kind of have this problem as a writer often where you're paying attention to everything you're doing, and you can sometimes make the assumption that others pay attention to everything. So to kind of make it easier for everyone, if you're just on the newsletter or on the Patreon, you're fine. You kind of will get everything important going forward. If you're just listening to this podcast, similarly, you'll get most of the important stuff going forward. There's other places you could go, which we'll talk about in a minute, but the Patreon and the newsletter are the two big ones. Get on the Patreon at staystrange.ca or get on the newsletter at strangeinc.ca. And don't worry about having to be everywhere. I will come to you more. I think in the past, I've sort of expected people to come to me, whether I really thought that was just, or not. I think I was sort of acting as if that was going to happen. And, it's of course, not going to happen. The other thing I want to just talk a bit about is Stranger Fiction. Like, what is its purpose? Why did I create this company called Stranger Fiction? Well, at its core, what it is, of course, is a publishing company. Now, I'm doing other things. I also provide some services, right? I provide services to some businesses, which I don't really talk a lot about because most people aren't businesses. Most of my audience isn't a business. Most of my audience is people. And I don't take on a lot of business clients. So I don't really advertise my services so much because I frankly don't want more clients. I'm just trying to focus on the clients I have for right now. But nevertheless, I do have a bunch of services that I provide through the company as a producer and as a writer. There's things that I do as Stranger Fiction or with, my worker bees helping out, who also work with me at Stranger Fiction. We provide some, services to some companies, but we don't need to worry about that for what we're talking about today. Front facing to the public, mostly what Stranger Fiction is a publishing company. We also have been involved in some production. We've got a movie that we were involved in the co-production of that's coming out, a horror movie, which I'll talk more about in future podcasts. So Stranger Fiction has some services it provides to businesses. It has some producing partners and is involved in productions. But mostly what we're focused on as far as, you're concerned, as far as the general public is concerned, as far as people, not corporations, are concerned, is publishing books, comic books, graphic novels, prose fiction. Specifically, fiction right? Fiction, not poetry, not other things, mostly. And fiction that is uh, twisting the conventions of certain genres. So a lot of what we will do is focused around horror, fantasy, science fiction, mostly horror, to some degree fantasy, science fiction really is horror, fantasy, horror, science fiction as a blend. Sometimes we do have some sort of comedic stuff in there, like Dirk Dirksen versus Stevenson Mars. This comic we put out has also sort of horror, science fiction, comedy. But for the most part, it's those genres, horror, science fiction, and fantasy. But particularly unconventional, especially genre blending or innovative approaches. So sort of weird fiction in a sense, but a little bit more in our wrapper, a bit more of a literary, experimental genre blending approach to these particular genre stories. Also do some other things, but that's sort of the core of what we do, and the core of what going forward you'll see as the sort of publishing mandate. So what you're going to see going forward is a lot of the books that we have made available as convention exclusives are going to start becoming available in the retail chain. So to a wider net of people internationally, and so on. So that distribution, as in 2026 especially, you're going to start to see this wider distribution of these books. You're going to start to see titles that you personally might have seen at a convention, but otherwise couldn't find in a bookstore. You're going to start seeing those coming out of bookstores. You're going to start to see, a real publishing schedule, and a real, regular publishing worldwide, with, again, a focus on genre fiction, prose fiction, a focus on graphic novels and comics. You're going to see these books at your local bookstore. You're going to see them at large bookstore chains. You're going to see them at the comic store. We're going to start to get that wider distribution. We're going to start to really, get these books out there in a big way. And, it's going to be some of my work, but mostly the work of others, my collaborators, people I've worked with in the past, some newer writers, and so on. And we'll talk more about all those in time, all the people involved and so on in time. By the time you're listening to this, some of the material is going to be back up on the website. We're kind of relaunching the website as I speak. But by the time you hear this, you'll be able to go to strangerfiction.ca and get a bit of a fuller sense of what we've got out available to you already, directly. Again, that stuff isn't available right now through normal trade channels, but will become available. And then we're going to start to see a regular cadence of publishing. So I think that's sort of the core of what I want to do here is, making fiction stranger by writing the wrong way is sort of how I wrapper it. I've got this sort of approach that I take to my writing, which I call writing the wrong way. It's also the approach I take to teaching writing. It's also, of course, the thing we talk about on this podcast, how to use an unconventional way of working, an unconventional way of writing to ironically produce better writing than, your peers, to produce more interesting writing than the general marketplace. I'm so sick of books that are the same. And, one of the reasons I started a publishing company is I really wanted a particular blend of things that I liked doing, that I liked when other people did. I know from myself trying to publish my work, how hard it can be to get this particular blend out there, because I'm sort of sitting at the nexus or the meeting place of experimental literature, particularly postmodern American and European literature, and, mainstream genre fiction. And while that seems like it would be a great thing that everyone would love, in reality, it's very hard to sell to a publisher. Now, is it hard to sell to public? I don't think so. I think that's the kind of thing people want. I think you can see examples of it. Books that do very well, you know, at the same time, uh, try convincing a publisher of this. It's very difficult. I found it very difficult to get my work placed at publishers. Now it's worked out good for me because what it's meant is I've ended up only being able to publish with great publishers who really understand what is going on and how the work works and what the value of it is. But those publishers are very few and far between. It's very competitive, right? They're small publishers, like myself. Stranger Fiction is a small publisher also. But just to sort of have another publisher out there who, is able to straddle that line between the so-called literary world and the so-called genre world, that art horror kind of line in comics and also in prose fiction. I think there's just room for another publisher like that. It's a place I want to be. And it's a way for me to focus my work as an editor and a writer in the same spot. And also, I think it ties in naturally with my teaching and talking about writing. So when I do this podcast, we're mostly talking about the nuts and bolts of having a creative career. But I think part of that, to me, which is valuable, is kind of opening the window or bringing people behind the curtain a little bit and letting you kind of see how the sausage is made. We talk about this a lot when I'm visiting the podcast Super Pulp Science, that Gregory Kamichik and Justin Curry, known the world over as Chasing Artwork. What they do that podcast. I'm often a guest on that podcast. And we sort of have a similar mindset in terms of putting out podcasts. Is we want to be transparent. We want to kind of let people in on the secrets, in a manner of speaking, of what we do. Not that they're big secrets, but that, there shouldn't be big secrets. Why can't we be transparent? The writing industry doesn't like transparency. The writing industry has a investment in being mysterious. It has an investment in gatekeepers, and it has an investment in exclusivity and in and out crowds. There's good sides of that. There's actually good sides of gatekeepers, but nevertheless, I think that all of it works better when it is transparent and when there's some actual discussion of what is going on. The other thing I want this publisher to do is to just be a fair partner. So many publishers are just not partners, but parasites. And I've been very lucky, as I've said, with my publishers, at least with some of them. For example, I publish a lot. I publish multiple books with Coach House Books. I published multiple books with Book Hug. I was publishing with them back when they were Book Thug, and now they're Book Hug. They did my first book. They did my most recent prose book. Coach House has done a number of my books. These are great publishers. These are the best publishers in the country. I'm very privileged to be publishing with them. I really have no complaints about Coach House and Book Hug. So please exclude Coach House and Book Hug from everything I'm saying right now. Most publishers deal with writers not as a partner, but as a parasite. Most publishers, in my opinion, not all publishers, but many of them, whether they mean to or not, they have this parasitic working method where they're sort of attaching themselves to you. They're siphoning off most of the money that should come your way. They're siphoning off your rights. Either they're taking them or they're locking them up as if they own them, even though they don't technically own them. Maybe they've technically licensed them, but they've effectively licensed them forever in all forms. Why? Well, there's good reasons for it. There's not good reasons for it. It's legitimate on some level for a publisher to work in this way. There are, ways it makes sense. There's ways it doesn't make sense. Regardless of it all, whether they intend well, whether they have evil intentions, um, the industry has just been slow to change. It's been slow to adapt. The mainstream publishing, traditional publishing, has been slow to adapt to the rise of technology, to the democratization of the means of production. We've ended up with this splintering between the sort of self-published, independent author world and the traditional world of publishing. That splintering is ridiculous, in my opinion. The hybridization of these industries is, I think, the necessary move that people need to be pursuing and thinking. And I think, for an established traditional publisher to survive, they need to operate differently. I think for a independent author to thrive, they need to stop being so antagonistic when it comes to the traditional publishing industry and so on. So I've always been interested in a kind of a hybridization of these independent and traditional approaches. Again, I'm very interested in dealing with people as a partner. I want to deal with writers. From the point of view of being a publisher, I want to deal with writers as a partner. From the point of view of being a writer, I want to find a publisher who is willing to operate like a partner, which, to some degree I have with BookHug and Coach House. But, there are still things that I think I could do with my own infrastructure. I still intend to be, publishing with these company, Coach House and BookHug, submitting books to them. Hopefully, having the books come out through them, and so on and so forth. And I've got some other publishers I've been talking to that I'm impressed by. Other, traditional publishers that I'm impressed by, mostly in the indie space. But there's some larger publishers who are doing some interesting things that I am impressed by also. So again, no means am I trying to sort of strike out as being antagonistic towards these publishers, but I just think too many publishers are parasites, and it's just how it works in the arts industry. So it works the same when producers in film. Too many of them are parasitically attaching themselves to the talent. Too many of them are, grabbing rights that they don't need, that they don't intend to do anything with. BookHug, by the way, is a great example of a publisher who has never asked me for a right that they do not intend to utilize. In fact, I've had to go back to them from time to time and say, hey, you never acquired this right. Do you want it? They've been very good about not overstepping their bounds. Their contract is the best contract I've ever seen. And it's, originally it was based to some degree on the Coach House contract, which is also a very strong, excellent contract. But, nevertheless, the point being here, again, if you exclude those two publishers that I've worked with, some of the other publishers I work with, I can't say I'm as pleased by. And you don't have to go and do the homework to figure it out. It's not relevant, the specific publishers I'm talking about. I'm just talking about a general sense. Too many publishers are parasites, not partners. Why can't there be a fair rev share split, particularly when the book comes into profit? Why can't there be more collaboration around things like covers? Coach has been very good to me about letting me, pick my own covers. They don't do that, I don't think, for most older authors, and I don't think they should. But again, these are the kinds of things that's worth having conversations around in, I think, a more transparent way than, sometimes things could have been done. So I don't want to go into details of, how this business stuff is going to look, but I just want to say, there's an ethos there that I want to pursue, and I want it to be reflected in things like royalty splits. At a certain point, if I'm coming into profit as a publisher, if it's kind of getting to the point where the book has now come into a profit scenario and I've kind of recouped costs like my print costs and so on. Why can't we start talking about a split of money, like a 50-50 or 70-30 or even an 80-20 split would be a fairer split than the 90-10 split that's typical. So I think that there's, room for these contracts to better reflect the reality and the difficulty of having a creative career. I have a problem as a writer that I just can't sign certain contracts because it's not sustainable for me to do so. So I've been offered contracts where it's like, I can't sign this contract because there's no way for me to have a career if I sign contracts like this. Yeah, I'd love to work with that person, but it's just not going to happen. I can't do it because they're not being fair. And I get why they're, offering me a standard sort of contract. I get it. It makes sense on a lot of levels, but, to really have a career, we can't be signing these contracts. Like, this is the basic problem that writers have in the publishing industry right now. If you want to deal with a traditional publisher, it's very difficult to have a career because they're taking everything that you need to have a career. And again, there's exceptions. I would say BookHug is an exception as an example. But too many of them are not thinking in this term. And so, of course, you see writers, treating, small indie presses as a farm team. Writers treat the small presses as a farm team for the big presses. Why would you ever publish the big press? Let's not get into my opinions on it. Let's just point out that it does a disservice to everybody. It inculcates an attitude that writers get where they want to move up from a small press to a large press, which I think personally is the wrong move. But that's sort of the move they often want to make. Instead, I think writers should be thinking about things differently. Because writers don't think about things the right way, publishers are sort of forced into this position of having to act like parasites. Because whenever they break a writer, the writer abandons them. And why wouldn't they? The writers don't see them like a partner. The publishers don't see the writers like partners. They all get kind of, hurt feelings at the end of the day. I feel like, there's exceptions. Again, I see a press like Coach House. I see people moving from large presses to a press like Coach House or to a press like BookHug. I've seen recently this kind of interesting phenomenon of large writers at larger presses moving to smaller presses for a lot of reasons. And we don't need to get into it, but one of the core reasons I would argue is that those sorts of presses, like press like BookHug, press like Coach House, they have an attitude of the writer as a person they're partnering with. They're willing to deal more fairly with them and so on. So that's a sort of publisher I want to align myself with, but I would like to go a little further in some of the deal points because I am, able to maybe flex a bit more since I have these other things that I'm doing as a producer, as a service provider. I've got a little bit more wiggle room in maybe some of the contracts. And also I'm not overextending myself, I don't think. We'll find out. But the other thing I really want to focus on is in terms of building a relationship with readers, with you listening, I think I'd really like to build a real relationship with readers who care about books. Again, I'm not talking about my publishers so much here, but too many publishers are trying to sell books to people who don't read. Too many publishers are focused on the gift economy of people buying books at Christmas to give to their friends. Too many publishers are focused on trying to spin off some media right relationship and not really so much this book that we're supposed to be laboring over. Too many publishers are out on social media superficially discussing things, putting things up on a TikTok. there's a place for all that stuff, but why don't I see more publishers going to conventions, talking to people? At Bay Press is locally is one exception here. I go to the Winnipeg Comic Convention and I see Matt from At Bay Press at the comic convention selling books. It's shocking to me how few publishers are doing that. I see some authors doing it. SM Biko, for example, is a real presence in the convention landscape. And also a person who has a traditional publisher and so on. And I see some of his publishers doing this sort of thing in other places. I've saw a lot of publishers at the Toronto Comic Art Festival, for example, that had traveled some distance to be there and so on. Again, it's not all publishers like this, but there's a type of publisher who just sort of hides behind the wall of the internet. There's a type of publisher that is up just putting things on social media and that calling it a day. And because really what they're doing is they're putting up a pretense of marketing the books. They're putting up a pretense of building relationships with readers. But it's all this one-way communication of like, hey, here's this new thing. And so on. And it just doesn't interest me. Mark Zuckerberg can hang out on Facebook. Elon Musk can hang out on Twitter. I don't want to hang out in those places. I don't know who runs TikTok, but they can have TikTok. It's fine to kind of post some things there, here and there, whatever. But I want the relationship to be a real relationship. I want to connect to you listening because you're the person who's listening. You're the person who cares about this stuff. When you join my newsletter, if you go to strangerfiction.ca, it sends you like a welcome email, and it says in that email, hey, this is my email address. You can reply to this email address. I was saying this to somebody at a convention. They were mentioning that they were on my newsletter, and they were saying something about like getting in touch with me about something. I said, look, just reply to the newsletter. That's my email address. It comes back to me. In all the newsletters I send out, you just reply to them and it goes back to me because that's how I want to talk to you. One-on-one communication. If I'm podcasting to you, you're talking to me, you're hearing me in your ears. You can't just open your mouth and say something and I'll hear it, but you could pop up, if you're on my newsletter, just reply to me. Send me an email. I'm at jonathan@strangerfiction.ca. It's very easy to get in touch with me or my team, whoever, is me in this case. But it's easy to get in touch with me and the other people at Stranger Fiction. And we're going to be doing some things like building some community around a Discord, building, some community around the Patreon page, connecting to people at conventions. I'm not so interested in these other things that where people tend to do, like posting stuff on social media. It doesn't matter to me. It shouldn't matter to you. And it's just meaningless to everybody who's not an oligarch owning a company, that is, profiting off of the social media looks. It just doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is books, art, talking to people about books and art, doing this podcast and so on. So going forward, you're going to see a lot of development in this direction. It's not all set up right now. But going forward, you're going to see lots of development in these sorts of directions. One, fuller focus on making more books that are more directly, clicked in to this idea of making fiction stranger, making stranger fiction. More kind of a focus on the writing the wrong way approach. Like I'm going to start talking more about it in this podcast. I'm going to do some workshops. I'm going to do some courses, things like this. And I'll eventually get some nonfiction books out. I'm going to do some podcast series on particular topics like grant writing and so on and so forth. So if you're a writer, there's going to be more resources for you coming out of Stranger Fiction that are organized in, I think, a more helpful way. If you're a reader, there's going to be more fiction coming out of Stranger Fiction. That is, again, mostly prose fiction and comics. as again, maybe easier to find, the kind of thing you can just walk in your bookstore and order, walk in your comic store and order. Uh, you don't necessarily have to come to a convention. But there's also going to be these other ways to get things directly from us earlier than maybe you'd find in a bookstore. Again, if you're a writer, keep your eye on strangerfiction.ca, because we're going to start taking submissions of books. I've got a kind of a slate of books coming out the next few years, which we'll talk more about as we announce them, of course. But I'm also going to be getting some submissions that I'm going to take more seriously. When I have all the pieces in place, one thing that is going to happen with this publishing company is going to be perhaps the best contract you could possibly find, which isn't saying much, by the way, the way that the publishing industry is. But this may be one of the better contracts you can find as a writer. But, we'll talk more about that when the time comes and I kind of announce that sort of stuff. Regardless, strangerfiction.ca is the place that will have submission guidelines at a certain point. And of course, strangeinc.ca is the newsletter where you're going to get all that info when it's really sorted out. Right now, it's pretty much sorted out, but I don't want to be announcing things until I have a few things sewn up. And then just, again, if you're a person who cares about books, if you're a person who cares about writing, whether you're a reader or a writer, keep listening to this podcast, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, get on the newsletter, and check out the Patreon, because the Patreon is going to really be the place. I've converted my own personal Patreon, which was kind of like I was haphazardly using, and was more sort of about supporting me and my work. That's transforming a little bit. And there's a few things that are kind of going to be at the core of what we do. So again, strangerfiction.ca is my core website. You can go check that out anytime. But of course, it is just a website. So, you'll find a lot of information there, but I don't know that you'll find, it's not necessarily a good way to stay in contact, because you can't really subscribe to it necessarily in the same way you can subscribe to, say, this podcast. If you're subscribed to this podcast, Writing the Wrong Way, again, the podcast is back. Here we are. We're back. Check out the old episodes if you haven't, if you're new. And then the new episodes, of course, coming out, I think you'll be excited about. I'm doing a thing called SFTV. Really, it's just my YouTube. I've decided to take the YouTube site a bit more seriously. So you'll be able to find this podcast at YouTube if you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube. A lot of times you'll find video for the podcast on YouTube if you like looking at the video. Sometimes there won't be super great dynamic video, and other times there will be. And then over time, I'm going to start putting more video content up. I'm going to start showing off my library, some of the kind of weirder examples of the quote unquote stranger fiction that maybe I didn't publish, but that I really love as a reader, things that have inspired me, things that are in my collection. I've got some interesting stuff in my collection. Whether it's just a weird book you might not have heard of, that's easy to find, but you just might not have heard of. Or maybe it's like a weird book that I am the only person who has a copy. I've got some books where there's like 25 copies in the world, and I've got one of them. I've got a book that I think there's, there's a book sitting behind me over here, which I'll show you another time, where there's, I think about 26 of them in the world, if I want to say, and I've got one of them. And that's a big deal, that book, which I'll get into another time. But, I'm going to want to do a bit more video about that kind of stuff. Again, I'm going to be doing these series on the podcast and also on the YouTube site, where it's kind of drilling down more on a topic. So for example, if you're a Canadian artist or Canadian writer wants to write grants and get some grant money, I'm going to kind of do some special series on that. I'm just sort of waiting right now to see what changes the Canada Council makes to their grants. They're currently in the process of changing a lot of things there. So I'm sort of holding back till I get a fuller sense of what changes they're making. But then I'll kind of put a bit more of a comprehensive information out like that. Some of that stuff will be available freely. Some of that stuff will only be available to people who are supporting the Patreon, or in some particular way. But again, you'll get more information about that stuff later. But the point sort of being that Stranger Fiction is going to spend more time on YouTube. It's going to spend more time podcasting. It's going to spend more time putting stuff on the website. Strangertv.com is a good place to go if you just are trying to find the YouTube. Just go to strangertv.com, strangertv.com. That'll just redirect you to the YouTube channel, just to make it easier for you. The newsletter, of course, you've heard me say 80 times, strangeinc.ca. Sign up to that, please. That's the best way for you and I to stay in touch. And again, it's going to be coming out on a more regular basis. It's going to be a bit more comprehensive in terms of like actually directing you to everything going on, and kind of giving you some fuller information about what's going on as Stranger Fiction and what's going on with me. So even if you're just a fan of me and you don't like other things that I'm doing, it will kind of be more fulfilling that. Of course, I'm mostly publishing books with this company, comic books, prose fiction. We're going to get into nonfiction a little bit, especially writing focused nonfiction in particular. And I'm going to doing again like these courses or series around particular topics. So again, some of that stuff will be free. Some of it will be, maybe a thing you've got to be subscribed to get, but nothing too crazy. The books, of course, will be available much more widely than you're used to. But if you're part of the community here, one of these strangers, as it were, you're going to get things before everybody else. And again, this Patreon is really the place to go. I really want to push Patreon, this idea that you're going to go to Patreon. Because Stay Strange is going to be the place, staystrange.ca, that will redirect you to the Patreon. By the time you hear me say these words, that Patreon will be up again in its revamped form. So if you go to staystrange.ca right now, you will see that there are different tiers. There's, I believe, a way you can simply follow the Patreon and, not necessarily get any of the exclusive stuff, but just sort of for free be following along and getting, the basic news. So, that's, I think, a handy feature that Patreon has. It's going to be a handy place to just get the news, even if you're not getting anything else, even if you're not supporting the press or whatever, but you like this sort of free stuff that we're doing, it'll be a good place to just get all the free stuff. But also it's going to give you the opportunity to support the press. And there's going to be sort of a tier where you're not necessarily getting a bunch of stuff in the mail, but you are getting access to the feed, the Patreon feed. So sort of think of this as a digital rewards tier or just a support tier where, yes, you're getting things. So for example, if I make a special series on, writing art grants, and if it's got a bunch of, example art grants that have been successful in the past and kind of a breakdown of how they work and whatever, if I'm selling that stuff in some other venue, you will get it here for free. If you're sort of supporting the press, getting this digital feed, this feed of digital rewards. There's also going to be the physical support the press, right? Where every month, because again, Patreon's a monthly thing. So if you're supporting the press by kind of, pushing money into Stranger Fiction every month, really helping it stays stable, really helping it do what it does, primarily publishing books, you'll get those books. We'll mail them to you. Every month, there will either be a new book out that I'll send to you, or, I'll send you an older book if, maybe it was available at a convention for the first time, but now it's, coming to retail. But there's going to be a tier where a physical rewards where you will get a mailing every month that you're subscribed. And if you just stay on that tier, then you're going to get every book published by Stranger Fiction. More or less in 2026, we're going to start doing a book a month. So it might not exactly be timed that way out, but you as a subscriber will get a book a month. So what I mean by that is, like you can subscribe right now before 2026 and start getting a book a month. So what that means is you'll be receiving books, maybe 6, maybe 9 months ahead of when people can get them in the world. So if you're, trying to buy a book in a bookstore, it might not come out till October, but maybe we're going to mail it to you in January because, we'll have some of this stuff early and available directly to the real people who are really supporting this press, Not that you're not supporting us by going to a bookstore and buying a book, but it's just not the same thing. Getting things earlier, you're going to get, this will be your opportunity to get things signed. Whenever possible, I'm going to send you that book signed. So if you're getting a book a month, you're going to get a book a month signed. If some sort of disaster strikes and a book gets delayed, or there's some other issue that kind of compromises my ability to publish a book a month for you, I will pick a book off my shelf and send it to you instead. So you'll get a book a month no matter what. You might, get some special item from my collection if things get delayed, and then next month get 2 books. That'll just be at my cost, my expense, my problem. For the most part, what you're going to get is what you're promised: book a month physical, assuming you're, staying subscribed. So I might send you more than that from time to time. I don't want to promise extra bonus things, but, let me just point out there'll be some extra bonus things from time to time. And that's really, I think, the best way to support the press. Honestly, I don't care about digital items in the digital world. I'm making them. Yes, there'll be ebooks of a lot of these books. Some of them won't have ebooks, though. Some of them will only be physical books. And those you'll have to, find us at a convention or go into the bookstore, or, ideally be subscribed to Patreon. Again, being subscribed to that Patreon is going to start to become the primary place that you can get everything physical before anyone else, signed if possible. And I say if possible because, sometimes it's not possible to get these things signed for complicated reasons. But that sort of tier is the tier I really am going to be recommending and encouraging. In fact, when you go to Patreon, you'll see this is the one I recommend. But of course, the digital tier, you'll still get everything. It's just keep in mind, some stuff's not ever going to be digital. So, you'll miss out on certain books that just, I'm not making digital versions of those books for various reasons. I want the physical to be special. So some of that stuff is just going to be physical only. That's just how I roll. That's how I've always rolled. That's how we're going to do things. But, you're going to get you might even get overwhelmed with the digital rewards, So of course, if you're getting the physical rewards, book of the month in the mail, you could just check your mailbox and call it a day, but you'll have the opportunity to get all that digital stuff too. It's just, you may not want it, right? If you're getting a physical copy, I don't know why you'd want to read the digital copy, but some people do. So, that will also be kind of coming your way. And again, you'll just sort of be on that feed for the digital stuff, if you're at the higher tiers. But the real exciting thing that I'm really pleased to announce is that you're going to be able to work with me at the highest tiers. So I'm going to have a high tier. If you, again, go to strangerfiction.ca, you can look at it and kind of get the details of what that higher tier is going to be. I'm still sort of sorting out on my own end what exactly the details are. But if you've been following along over the years, you may have noticed that I used to do a lot of editing for authors. So I used to do copy editing. I used to do substantive editing for authors, and I stopped doing it. It used to be you could go to my website and you could buy a manuscript review. You could buy, me editing your manuscript. And I took those products off the site. And if you're one of the people who's contacted me trying to hire me as a manuscript editor, if you've written a book and you've tried to get, me to edit your book, in recent years, you may have noticed that that I told you no, I'm not doing that anymore, and I've recommended other people, right? So, I'm going to sort of come back in a limited way to being an editor that a writer can hire. Now, I've kept editing books for companies. I've kept, giving manuscript reviews for publishers. But what has sort of happened more or less over the years is this: my time has sort of gotten crushed to such a premium. As I've had more kids and as I've just sort of done more things in my career and as I've been trying to focus on this company, I just had less time to do things like work with writers one-on-one as an editor, um, or in other capacities, and I've stopped doing it. And so I've continued to do it to some degree for companies. This is the other thing. My rates sort of rose so high that I just felt bad charging authors a rate that often was, more than they were going to be able to get as an advance for their book. I just, if you're only going to get $500 advance, it's, kind of feels like, why am I charging you $1,000, $1,500, and so on? So there's good reasons for that. That's sort of the kind of rates I ended up arriving at for a variety of reasons. But, you know, it gets to be a burden for an author who may never recoup. And so I sort of started to phase out doing that kind of thing at all. But I'm going to start phasing it back in. So what you're going to see if you go to staystrange.ca at that high hub, or that high tier rather, you're going to see, there's a limited amount of spots where you can kind of have this one-on-one back and forth with me in the month. We'll have a certain number of meetings. I'll give you feedback on a certain amount of writing, if you're a writer, or I'll just, talk to you. It doesn't have to be about giving feedback on your writing, although it could be. But it could also be about, talking to you about your career, talking to you about, what you're trying to do in your writing business, talking to you about, what are sort of the personalized pieces of advice I might give you. I've moved away from doing that kind of mentorship over the years. I've kind of stopped doing it, frankly, except for once in a while, every few years, I've worked with them through the Manitoba Writers Guild. I've worked with a writer, but really it's been like I've worked with one writer every few years is kind of what it's come down to. And again, this is for a lot of reasons. Mainly it's because my time got too precious, my costs got too high. So rather than kind of, pursue it in this way, I just sort of stopped doing it. And, I also started to teach a little bit more creative writing and, writing related courses at the University of Winnipeg. So my sort of justification in my head was, well, I'll do some mentorship with the Manitoba Writers Guild. I'll do some connecting with people, younger, more emerging writers through the University of Winnipeg. And I still do that, but I'm slowly starting to phase that stuff out. I'm slowly bringing back these opportunities to work directly with me to kind of get some, clarity or coaching or mentorship, whatever you want to call it, on your creative career as a writer. And even get some feedback on me from your writing. Right now, the only way you can get feedback with me is if you were to apply through the Manitoba Writers Guild and they end up connecting you to me, which may or may not happen, or if you go to University of Winnipeg and sign up and take my course. So those are options for you, I guess. But I'm going to have a much cheaper and more, I think, more of a one-on-one opportunity at this Patreon tier. And if you are a writer who has ever wanted to work with me or work with anyone, whether it's me or not, and you get that kind of one-on-one, mentorship or feedback and so on. Again, these Patreon rates really represent low rates for me. So that's why I'm limiting it to very few people. So we'll see how fast it fills up and so on. But let me just say that I'm going to start closing the door on other ways to work with me. It's already very hard to work with me. I'm actually opening up this as a way to work with me. So it's kind of making it increasing my availability. And then I'm going to start shuttering these other things as I kind of fold everything to Stranger Fiction. I'm trying to phase out this other stuff, right? I want everything to be under the umbrella of Stranger Fiction. There's a lot of reasons for that. But, professionally speaking, personally speaking, I just need a life that is less complex. I need to be torn in fewer directions. I want everything in one spot. I'm sort of taking a lot of my time. I mean, I don't get paid by Stranger Fiction. I own the company, but I don't take a salary out of the company. I'm kind of, reinvesting everything into Stranger Fiction these days, including my time. So, this Patreon is really going to be the centerpiece of things in this direction. The company's not going to live and die by this Patreon because, like I say, it's selling books still. We're providing services to companies and so on. But what I'd like is to phase out some of these other things, right? What I'd like is to simplify. What I'd like is this Patreon to become the core of supporting the company so we can do bigger and better things. We'll do some Kickstarters for certain books. We'll do some other things. But you don't need to be involved in any of that stuff. You can just be on the Patreon. As an example, anything I kickstart, you'll get if you're on certain tiers, the physical tier of the Patreon, right? Anything that I do elsewhere, you'll get if you're on the physical tier of the Patreon. If you're working with me via the Patreon, if you take one of those higher slots, you'll get all the physical books. You'll get all that lower tier stuff, and you'll get, this, ability to work with me, to get some feedback from me, to get some mentorship and so on, which otherwise you're not honestly not going to be able to get unless you sign up to my course at the University of Winnipeg. Basically, I'm not going to do it anymore outside of the Patreon. And I'm going to even phase out the University of Winnipeg at a certain point, frankly. So, not that working with me is the thing all writers must do. But if you do have that interest and you want, this Patreon is actually going to be a pretty reasonably priced way to do it. At least initially, it's going to kind of be going up over time. I will warn you. So if you are interested in it, maybe try it out, or at least seriously think about trying it out as we're sort of launching now. So again, if you're hearing this podcast and it's roughly around when the podcast came out, then strangerfiction.ca. You can go there. You can see the tiers. Maybe you can work with me if it's not full up already, if that's interesting to you. Or, if it's not interesting to you, maybe you know somebody who it might interest. Do please help spread the word. If this isn't your thing, that's fine too. But help spread the word, please. But that's sort of the nutshell. I hope this has been kind of clear. The big takeaways I want everybody to kind of listening to have is Stranger Fiction is a publishing company that is trying to put out interesting, innovative genre fiction primarily, or fantasy science fiction. We're trying to do so in a way that's fair, partnering with writers rather than being parasitically attached to writers, feeding off them, and so on. We're trying to kind of construct this infrastructure that allows this work to get spread across the world to where it needs to go. We really want to serve the art, serve these books, but also serve an audience. And I think part of serving the audience in this way is doing things like, letting the people who support the press get the books first, get them, months before they're available elsewhere. Working directly with me if possible, right? As time goes on, we may branch that out a bit more, and maybe you'll have sort of more opportunities to work with me. Maybe we'll close it down. You'll have less opportunities to work with me, but you might have more opportunities to work with other people through the company, uh, and so on. I really want um, this to be a publisher that has a real identity and a real audience. And therefore, as a writer, if you're coming into the fold, we have sort of a setup that we're kind of getting, the books to you. Think about it from a writing point of view, right? If you fast forward and we have a Patreon that's actually humming along at a decent pace, well, the second you sign up with us, boom, you got, all those people are getting your book in that future world, right? All those people are, getting it well before it's available elsewhere. So all those people, are potentially spreading word of mouth, building buzz, and so on and so forth. This is how it is going to work in an ideal world. We'll see the strengths of it. We'll see the weaknesses of it. We'll see the challenges. We'll see the opportunities. I want you to really, as a person listening, be coming along for the ride a little bit with me here. We're at the point where I think a lot of the puzzle pieces are falling into place. I want to talk a bit more fully about these things as they're happening. I want to be kind of transparent about the challenges and the opportunities of the whole scenario. We'll be doing that in Writing the Wrong Way in future episodes. We'll be doing it when I'm guesting on Super Pulp Science. I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about in Super Pulp Science. I'll see you at conventions. I'll talk to you through the newsletter if you want to hit me back, email me back. Anytime you get it, you can just hit reply, get in touch with me directly. But if you want to work with me, it's going to be through the Patreon. That's the only place, unless you're in the University of Winnipeg, which I don't know that you are. Right. Most people aren't just kicking around Winnipeg here. I know that this podcast goes out to a lot of people who are in Winnipeg. So, feel free to take a class with me. But you'll get more personalized attention, honestly, through this Patreon, even than you would there. And it'll likely be cheaper for you, although, depends, I suppose, on the specifics. Hey, hope this has been interesting. If you haven't already checked out strangerfiction.ca, please do. We're going to try to really do something different and interesting. I think that there's a lot of interesting opportunity at this point in the publishing industry. It's a very scary time in the publishing industry if you have been paying attention. The comics industry has been contracting. The book industry has been collapsing in many respects. In Canada, the granting bodies have been a mess in many ways, at least at the federal level. The universities don't know what to do, right? They have no clue what they're doing, particularly when it comes to AI. They've just got no handle on it at all. So, where does that leave us all? Well, I think it's an interesting time. I think, you have this interesting nexus of industry that has not been sustainable for very long is becoming increasingly collapsible. You've had just pieces falling off. You've had, tariffs coming in or not coming in. Do they apply to books? Do they not apply to books? We had a scenario recently where some books that were printed not by Stranger Fiction, but by our partner in the United States, which I'll talk about another time after they've announced that news. But they had printed a book in China, and they sent a bunch of the copies to me. And, tariffs had not affected the printing, but they started to affect the port fees. And then, of course, when I'm trying to take the books into my possession, or the company's possession in this case, Well, it turned out they changed a lot of the laws related to this because, they're trying to kowtow to, these demands that the border security be increased and so on and so forth. All these sorts of ripple effects happening that, you can't predict. Anyway, thank you for staying strange. Thank you for writing the wrong way. Thank you for going to staystrange.ca and either supporting uh, Stranger Fiction or just following along to what we're doing, thinking about supporting it later. Please do. If you want to work with me in any capacity, again, you make sure you do take one of those slots before they're gone, if they're not already gone. And yeah, keep listening to the podcast. Please spread the word. Keep writing the wrong way.